Well, what's up again there, guys? Brian here, the 3 Topics Gamer, and I have another awesome requested rankings list from worst to best. This time going over the 8 primary Harry Potter films. Now, I was actually a little bit surprised that this one actually ended up winning the last poll, but heck, I was actually pretty excited when it did win because, heck, I love talking about non-gaming things because I'm more than just a gamer, and heck, I like to express those type of thoughts. So I just want to thank everyone who voted for that idea. And before you jump into this list, if you happen to enjoy it by the end, do not forget to give this video a thumbs up and press the subscribe button if you happen to enjoy this video and would like to see more content like that. Now, as I've stated earlier, we are going to go over just the primary 8 Harry Potter films. We're not going to be talking about the Fantastic Beasts films that have come out because not all of them have been released. And if you're someone like me at about my age, then you would know that yes, I did grow up with Harry Potter. I did read all the books, which, you know, that's probably the first book series that actually got me into reading. I did happen to see all of the Harry Potter films in theaters, and I'm just stating this right now. I do not think any of them are awful. So in terms of worst to best, I wish I could say, you know, least to best, but just trust me, none of them are bad. If I could give each of them, if I could just rank them in terms of, like, you know, movie ratings, I think the lowest one would be like a B minus, and the highest would obviously be an A. So there's 8 of them. So we're gonna start off going with my least favorite Harry Potter film, which I've seen a number of these similar lists like this, and a lot of people also do kind of pick this one as their least favorite. But my least favorite Harry Potter film undoubtedly has to go to the very first one, which is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, or if you live in Europe or in other places, the Philosopher's Stone, which I don't even know why they didn't think philosophers would work here in the States. I have no problem with that. Now, there's not really too many problems with this film, except the fact that it is just a tutorial film. I think the acting from the primary main 3 characters is definitely the weakest here, but heck, it is the beginning, so you can't really flack them so much. I think that the story itself isn't all that interesting because, again, it is an introduction into the Harry Potter world, or the wizarding world for a lot of us. And so not much happens, and not much can happen. You kind of have to make your story very, very basic so that not only adults, but children and fans can follow it. Now, certainly, like every other adaptation from novels to film, there were a number of changes that were made. Now, having someone who has actually gone through all these books and has seen some of these changes, I would probably say that this movie's changes were justified. There's definitely a number of things in the book they could have added, but heck, I can understand why they didn't add them. But again, I do think it is the weakest in just about every single department outside of its overall cinematography. As I'm sure some of you guys have known, that when you start off with the earlier Harry Potter films, they're much more colorful, things aren't as bad, things aren't getting as crazy, and so it seems much more magical. And then as you get to the later films, they definitely get much more darker. And I do love that theme that they do throughout these films. But again, this is just the one that I would undoubtedly watch the least. But heck, if I ever have to do a marathon, I have no problem putting this one in. So that's why it is my least favorite. Going into number 7, following that one, it has to go with the Chamber of Secrets. Now, same issues as the Sorcerer's Stone. Now, at this point, things are starting to kind of get a little bit more speed. You have the introduction of Tom Riddle and the introduction of Tom Riddle's diary, and we know how significant that's going to be later on down the road. The acting definitely did improve here a little bit. I absolutely did enjoy the story with the basilisk kind of just, you know, slithering through Hogwarts and petrifying some students, although I am surprised that no one died this time around. I did one thing that, you know, you don't see a lot of is I think this film does Harry and Ron the strongest in terms of how they can act on their own, because, you know, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen it, at some point Hermione becomes incapacitated and Ron and Harry have to go on without her, and you don't see that a lot throughout the films. Usually we kind of need Hermione to get us out of difficult situations, but, you know, it's nice to see just how incredible she is as a character, because even when she is incapacitated, she is still able to help out the boys, because, you know, without, I mean, even Harry says this later on in the films, like, you know, without Hermione, there's so many times they would have been in trouble. I think Ron is the one who said that, so Hermione's an absolutely incredible character. I did like the flashback scenes. I did like seeing young Dumbledore. However, when you compare to other scenes that have young Dumbledore, it looks a little bit odd. But I would say this one, where the weakest element I think this film has is it definitely has the weakest or the worst defense against the dark arts teacher. I'm not going to say who he is, but it's just annoying. Every time he was on the screen, I mean, he's supposed to be that way. He is that way in the books, but it's just like, do more with this character. I know he's a fraud. But just every time he was on the screen, it just like, even back then when I was a much younger person, I was just like, oh God, get this guy off the screen. Not the actor, the character. But again, I think it is okay for what it does. Things do get a little bit serious, a little bit more darker. It just doesn't quite pique my interest as other entries. So that's why it is ranked number 7 on this list. Going into number 6 is probably not going to surprise a lot of people, but I have to put the Goblet of Fire. Holy hell, do they butcher the shit out of that book. I mean, my God. This one, I think, did the worst job projecting the book. Undoubtedly, out of all of them. The first two I can understand because they are the first two books. So they kind of are the introduction to the franchise. But by the fourth book, things are really starting to get moving. Things are really starting to kick off. And I think at that point, it's like, okay, you really need to start getting these books right. And Goblet of Fire does not do the best job at projecting what eventually happens, especially since it's such a big book. I mean, I think out of all the films, it's probably the second longest, because just looking at here, this movie is 2 hours and 37 minutes long, making it the second longest Harry Potter film here, with the longest one being, surprisingly, The Chamber of Secrets, which surprised hell out of me, because that one is like 2 hours and 41 minutes, which is just shocking, because they could easily have trimmed a good 20 minutes out, and I don't think I would have missed much. But I think the problem that I have with the Goblet of Fire in terms of the film adaptation is just how poorly they executed the three main tasks, and how little time they even spent on the other Triwizard Tournament champions. Now, I understand this is a Harry Potter story. I understand we have to focus on Harry, but it would not. I don't think it would have killed them to actually show the other Triwizard champions why they were chosen, why they are so good. I actually would have liked to have seen them a little bit in action. We never see that, and they absolutely dropped the ball on the last task with the labyrinth. The depiction of the labyrinth scene in the film is absolutely pathetic. There were certainly a number of key things that I had read in the book that I was so looking forward to actually seeing. It is handled so much better in the books, and it's just pathetically handled in the film. I was generally upset that they did do that, and they kind of do something like that in another movie, but I can understand why they didn't do it. I can understand why, but in this film, no reason. There was a number of things they could have easily have taken out and focused on other characters. Just because Harry Potter is the main character doesn't mean that everything that we see on screen has to focus entirely around him. In fact, some of the best scenes that I've seen in a Harry Potter film had nothing to do with Harry being in the facility. Yeah, we're talking about him, but let's get away from him. I understand he's the main character, but let's focus on other things that are going on in this world instead of having it all seem to revolve around this one person, which I don't think any franchise should ever do. So, although I don't think it's a bad film, this is by far my least favorite in terms of adapting the book to film. Not a bad film, but they really dropped the ball in a number of key sections, which is why it makes it very, very difficult for even today to watch it with a straight face. But again, it does work enough for me to get through it. I definitely the interaction between Voldemort and Harry Potter at the end is beautifully handled. I think Ralph Fiennes was a perfect cast choice for Voldemort. But again, just God, do they butcher that book, which is why I have to put it as number 6 on my list. Now, if you give me a second here, because this thing just went down. All right, going into number 5 is a movie. Also, a lot of people didn't like this one all that much, and that is The Half-Blood Prince. Now, I like The Half-Blood Prince. I do think it is the slowest film. I think visually, it's also my least favorite one of all. But I do like the introduction of the Horcruxes and figuring out what how they're significant to Voldemort. I absolutely love seeing Dumbledore in action in the one scene that everybody knows, and what happens to him at the end, it was still very effective. Even though I had read the books and I knew what was going to happen, I thought the build up to it was absolutely wonderfully handled. I would even say out of all of the Harry Potter films, this one undoubtedly has my favorite depiction of Dumbledore. Now, we've always had 2 different actors that have played Dumbledore throughout the series, at least not counting Jude Law in the Fantastic Beasts films. But I think this one definitely felt more like Dumbledore's film. He was the MVP of this film, unquestionably. And I thought the action, which there's not a lot of it in this film to be fair, but I think the one scene that I think a lot of people were kind of upset that they kind of screwed up, which I understand was the supposed Battle of Hogwarts, because for those who haven't read the books, there is a kind of Battle of Hogwarts at the end of this book, but I can understand why they didn't do that in the film. It's kind of almost on it's kind of completely opposite to Goblet of Fire, in the sense that there was a number of key scenes in the books that I wish they had transferred over to the films, and they didn't do that. For this book, however, I can understand why, because if you have a Battle of Hogwarts here, then it kind of would feel too similar to the next Battle of Hogwarts that happens in the next book. So I can understand why they made that decision. I thought it was effective for what they did, and I thought that Severus Snape and making the unbreakable vow and him having to kind of do all these crazy tests and knowing his backstory later on, I thought made it all the more effective. But it does kind of sit in the middle of the road for me. But I did really enjoy this film very, very, very much. Which is why I would place it number 5 on my list. Now, number 3 and number 4, you can't really separate them. I don't know anyone who's done a ranking list like this that can separate them, but it is the Deathly Hallows films. But going with number 4 has got to go with Deathly Hallows Part 1. This is definitely a great finale. I think this is probably the only novel series that I think was justified in cutting its last book into 2 parts, which started a chain reaction in other franchises. If I recall, after this one, Twilight decided they wanted to cut their last book into 2 parts. Hunger Games decided they want to split their series into 2 parts, and then The Hobbit did it, but that was like in 3 parts, but that was like not even justified, because I'd heard they wanted to cut that in 2 parts, which I think would have made it a much more cohesive series of films. But yeah, this is the only one I thought was justified, not just because it was the finale, but there was actually enough content to cut it into 2 different movies, and they have 2 different tones. And the way I compare Part 1 and Part 2 is like this. Part 1 kind of has like mostly talking and just mostly moving the plot forward and very little action, and then when you get to Part 2, it has a lot of action and very little talking. However, I will say this, I'm not sure if this is just me, but the biggest complaint I have with Deathly Hallows Part 2 is in the 3rd act, this movie gets dark. And I don't mean like dark in terms of bad things happening. I'm talking about like visually dark, to the point where I can't even see what the hell is going on. Like, I had a hard time seeing things in the theater. And so there's certain scenes that I can't even watch unless I literally like turn off all the lights or cover all the curtains, and I can just kind of tell what's going on. Maybe I don't think it would have killed them to lighten things up a little bit just so I can see. But yes, I got to put parts 1 and parts 2 together, so they do fill up spots 4 and 3. So now we come down to the last 2 in my top 2 favorite Harry Potter films. And number 2 is a lot of people's favorite Harry Potter film, and I can understand why. And that is The Prisoner of Azkaban. This is undoubtedly my favorite of the Harry Potter books. Unquestionably, it is my favorite book. And for a number of good reasons. Because if you really think about it, I absolutely love Sirius Black as a character. Undoubtedly. I think Gary Oldman did an incredible job with Sirius Black. And I would say throughout the entire series, I think Daniel Radcliffe's acting was really at its best when he was acting with Gary Oldman. And I think even Daniel Radcliffe had said that in an interview some time ago. But I think out of all of them, I think this is the one that kind of deals with very little Voldemort in dealing with like a side story. I think Lupin is without question the best defense against the dark arts teacher. I think he's the most effective, and I think the use of the Dementors is truly haunting. I mean, you just read about what these Dementors do, and you kind of can't visually, like, even back then I couldn't visually understand exactly what the Dementors are doing, but actually seeing it on screen, I was like, oh my god, these things are just creepy. I mean, every time they show up, all the happiness in the world just goes away and everything gets all cold. And I think those scenes are just very, 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 very effective. Yeah, and however, I will say this. The only flaw I have with the books and the films, which I think even some people would acknowledge, is the use of the Time Turner. Time Turners have been a constant problem throughout this entire franchise, and even J.K. Rowling acknowledged, like, yeah, maybe time travel can really mess things up. And I have to admit, the use of time travel in this doesn't quite break the film for me, because I'm like, okay, how are things happening during like the first rotation, like before anyone has ever used these time travelers, before ever even going back in time, how did certain things actually happen? Did they even happen the way they did? And so that entire scene was just kind of confusing. It's like, wait a minute, were they always there, or did something else happen, and then that's what caused them to have to go back in time? It's just a complete mess. It undoubtedly is probably one of the, not the worst uses of time travels, but it is certainly not one of the best. But I would say that's the only weak part of this film. I think seeing the kids in class during their third year was absolutely great. I thought a number of sequences were very, very well handled. I think Buckbeak is just an absolutely adorable creature, and I think that the use of the Patronus at the end was pretty badass, especially for Harry, who could pull that off being a third year. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed Prisoner of Azkaban. I can understand why a lot of people do really love this, and it is their favorite. But there is one more Harry Potter film that I think is undoubtedly my favorite. And number one has to go to Order of the Phoenix. This is, in my opinion, this is really Harry at his, this has, my best in a lot of things. Number one is probably my best visually impressive Harry Potter film, in at least my opinion. I think Harry is the most proactive in this film than any other films, because he has to take a much more teacher role, because when Umbridge comes to, dear God, oh my, Umbridge is such an incredible villain. Perhaps even more so than Voldemort, because she wears all pink, and it's just like, this woman is just an absolute sadist. I mean, don't get me wrong, Voldemort's got his issues, but God, I love to hate this woman. She does the actress did a fantastic job of her character. I liked seeing Harry act as a teacher, and that's really where I think Harry is at his best, is when he's actually taking a leadership role and actually helping to progress other characters and helping to get them stronger. I love what he did with Dumbledore's army. I think that I would say the last third is probably my favorite last third of any Harry Potter film. And I think that the showdown between Dumbledore and Voldemort is undoubtedly the best wizarding duel in the entire franchise. In fact, the one big issue that I have with a lot of the wizard duels in the films is that they're all so similar. They're all pretty much like beam locks, and they just push back and forth. And when you've seen it a number of times, it was cool the first time seeing it in the Goblet of Fire, but when they do it a number of too many times, it gets kind of boring. I mean, even by the end, it did get kind of boring. But I think that when you've actually read the books, there's a lot of creativity in how they use magic, and there's so much inventiveness. And I don't think any other duel outside of the Voldemort-Dumbledore duel shows just how creative and how powerful these two characters are. This is the best depiction of what an actual wizard fight between two insanely powerful spell wizards would be like. And that is why it is not only my favorite wizarding duel in the series, I would even go so far as to say it's probably easily a top 5 favorite one-on-one fight in cinema history. I mean, I would say it's up there with fights like Anakin versus Obi-Wan Kenobi from Revenge of the Sith and other fights I've seen in other films. It's up there, I would say. It's definitely in the top 5 for me. But there's just so much I enjoy about this film. I've certainly seen this one the most amount of times. And though The Order of the Phoenix is not my favorite book, I think that when you compare Azkaban to Order of the Phoenix, I think that this one actually, in some cases, made improvements upon the book and managed to take a book that is kind of mediocre and elevate it to make a much better film, as opposed to Prisoner of Azkaban, which I think very much balances it out, which is why Order of the Phoenix is undoubtedly my favorite Harry Potter film of all time. Now, I know this video went a little bit long, but heck, got a lot of explanations, but that's my breakdown. If you happen to enjoy this breakdown and would have a breakdown of your own, be sure to share your list and how you would rank the 8 primary Harry Potter films. Share your list with me and everyone else in the comments down below. And like always, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I'll see you next time.